Well, welcome again to another one of my podcasts. And today I'm going to do something a little different. Uh, I'm, I'm not going to share from the Bible this morning. I'm going to kind of share a little bit of my life. And what I want to do is, I know there's a lot of people out here that don't know who I am, and they don't know anything about my background. So, what I planned on doing is just kind of talking to you about the first 40 years of my life, and then I'm going to break this into two episodes, and then the next one I'll talk about the last 40 years of my life. Uh, with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my full screen here, and I've got a bunch of old photos, and I'm just going to do is I'm going to start a slideshow, and I'm just going to let it run in the background. These are a lot of the old pictures of my family. This was my great 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 grandfather and grandmother, and this was my grandfather. He was on the Yosemite uh, on Lake Superior. This was taken 1900 something. And this is kind of my dad's side of the family. That was his brother. Uh, I'm not going to go through each picture, but I just want to mention my dad here. I'm going to stop this picture here. Whoop. Let's see if I can get to it here. Go back to it and see there, right there. My dad. That's my dad right here. Uh, he had button-top shoes on, Stetson hat. He was kind of a wild guy. But anyway, I was raised in a family that my dad was married three times, and his first wife, he had a son and daughter, and we'll come to their pictures eventually. Uh, these are mostly aunts, uncles, stuff like that. You don't know who they are, but just kind of some of my memories as a kid. There's my brother there. That's Jerry. He's the one. Oh, well, anyway, uh, Jerry was in World War II, and he was on the beaches in Normandy. He had a lot of war stories and whatnot he shared with me. But I had uh, I had been raised in a family that my mother and father loved one another, but my dad was a drinker. Most of his families were, and every time we got together, we were always party, 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 and I grew up in that atmosphere, and it actually didn't really bother me that much outside of that. Uh, I seen a lot of things that a lot of kids probably wouldn't have seen if they would have been brought up in a kind of an environment that was more stable than mine, put it that way. But like I said, my mother and father loved one another, and I was around a lot of drinking. In fact, as a kid, we used to hide under the table, and then when nobody was looking, we used to drink somebody's beer or whatever. And we used to get tipsy even when I was a kid. And then my dad was kind of a strong guy, and nobody told him what to do. He was he was big and he was powerful. He could really fight. There's my dad and myself sitting on that little stool. It's my brother Jerry. But as uh, as I was growing up, my dad, I think it was I was around 12 or 13 years old. He used to take me in bars, and I used to sit next to him in a bar, and he'd order me a beer. And the bartender said, "I can't serve him a beer." He says, "My kid, and I'll do what I want with it." And bartender would give me a beer, so I'd sit and drink a beer with him. Uh, and as time went on, I became an alcoholic, and I went into the service when I was 17 years old. And I was a pretty heavy drinker even back then at 17. And I got into a lot of trouble in the military, and it was mostly because of my drinking. And I I ended up in jail quite a bit. I was in a stockade for a while, and I finally got a chance to go overseas. I went to Japan. I was stationed in Texas at the time. I went right from basic training in San Antonio to Lackland Air Force Base. That's where I took my basic training. I went right to Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. And I spent about 27 months in Texas in the military. And then I went over to Japan for a while, and I got into some trouble. I fell asleep with a cigarette, and I started the barracks on fire. And, well, little to say, I ended up on Iwo Jima. And it was a 12-month tour on Iwo Jima, but seeing I spent some time in Japan, they prorated it, and I had to spend 10 and a half months on Iwo Jima. And it was we call it a rock in the middle of the Pacific. But it was the Black Pearl of the Pacific. It was the island where there was, there was a lot of lives lost on that island. The Japanese had dug in pretty deep, and when we invaded the island, it was hard to get them out of these caves and whatnot that was on the island. The whole island was honeycombed with caves, and while I was over there, they were still finding caves, and they were trying to close them because the island had sulfur deposits, and if you ever smelled sulfur, it smells like rotten eggs. And actually, all these caves they would try to shut, they would open more up. As they would try to blow the mouth of it shut with a small amount of explosives, and so nobody could go in them because there was old tripwires, old grenades. There was a lot of stuff in these caves. So, and then as time went on, I decided I had enough of the service. So I decided I was going to get out. I already had one honorable discharge, and back then they were cutting back on the military, and when I came back from Japan, I was sent to the state of Maine. I was at Carrefour Air Force Station on Limestone Air Force Base up in Caribou, Maine, and I finished my tour there, and then I came home from there. And I actually got home, it was right around 1959, 1960, I think it was. And I met my wife right away, or my wife to be, put it that way. And we actually got married in 1960. And this past anniversary, we just celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. But going back to my childhood, when I was growing up, I was kind of a troublemaker. I was always in trouble. I ran with a gang of kids, and we would try to figure out things. It was my dad and me. Yeah, can't believe I was that young at one time. Anyway, when I was young, though, I ran with this gang, and we did a lot of things. We would steal and just try to figure out what we could do. And I remember one day I was going to school. I went to an all-boys school. I went to Boys Technical High School, and I used to have to walk to school. And as I walked along this path, there was kind of a low brick wall, and I used to jump up on it, and I'd walk the length of this wall. It was so wide, wide enough to walk on, put it that way. And so I would walk along, and there was trucks backed up to this wall, And I used to jiggle the handle on every one of them when I walked by to see if they were unlocked. And there was this one truck that had a big Camel cigarette sign on the side of it, and the thing opened up. I was really surprised, and I looked inside, and it was full of cigarettes and candy bars and things that you deliver to a bar or grocery store. So I quick closed it up, and I got to school, and I told some of my friends about it. So that night we went over and uh, we took coaster wagons, whatever we could find to haul things, and we emptied that truck up. Emptied it out, I mean, and we took it and put it in a friend's basement. And we actually, for quite a few days, if anybody'd ask you for a cigarette, you throw them a whole pack, you know. And we had enough candy bars, and so we were doing real good. And finally, the cops came over. I remember this guy's. I'm trying to think. He was kind of a big, heavy-set kid. Oh, Klafke, I think his last name was. I don't remember what his first name was. Been so long ago. But he's the one that had the stuff in his basement, and the cops picked him up, and he started crying, and he gave it and gave everybody's names, and so we were all caught. And well, they ended up taking back what we didn't. See, here's one of those drinking parties. Anyway, we all spent time in jail, put it that way. And then another time we went to the AMP warehouse where they had they loaded all the trucks to take it to the grocery stores and stuff. And boy, we could smell fresh bakery because there was a bakery next door, and they'd bake all fresh breads and buns and sweet rolls. So we thought we'd swipe a whole box of sweet rolls and go up and eat them. So when the guy brought a load in and he went back to get another load to put in the truck, I jumped up on the dock, ran in the truck, grabbed the box thinking it was sweet rolls, and threw it down. And we took off and ran up on the railroad tracks up on a trestle, and we opened up the box, and here we had hard rolls. It didn't make any difference. We sat up there eating hard rolls. Anyway, this is one of my trips to Canada. Sitting there eating these sweet rolls, we decided, well, we'd go back down there and see if we could swipe something else. So we found a truck where they were loading produce. And so we ended up stealing a bunch of watermelons. And we went all over the neighborhood putting watermelons on everybody's porches, kind of playing Robin Hood, steal from the rich and give to the poor. And this is kind of the childhood that I had when I was growing up. So when I was just turning, well, actually, I was still 16 yet, when I got into some real bad trouble, and I ended up going to juvenile court, and I know I was going to end up in juvenile detention, and but I got in front of the judge, and the judge gave me an ultimatum. He says, either go into service. That was when I graduated from grade school. They said when you had a chance to either go to reform school or you could enlist in the military. Well, I chose the military because I didn't want to go to reform school. And that's kind of how I started my life out. And I got married, like I said, in 1960. And when I got married, we ended up moving down to Florida for a while. But we didn't like it down there and ended up coming back. I was raised in the Milwaukee area. I was born there and was raised there. It's my mother. One of my first girlfriends, I guess. So anyway, when I was just had gotten married, and we moved to Florida, and then we came back to Milwaukee, and then my first child was born. I had a boy, and then my wife got pregnant again, and we were married 2 years, had no kids. We were married 3 years and had 3 kids, because the second pregnancy, my wife had a set of twins. So we ended up with three kids, 2 boys and a girl. Well, and then they started to come. We ended up, we had 6 children. And these 6 children that we had, that was my dad's basement. I think this was my wedding reception. Anyway, I ended up having 6 kids, and when we moved around quite a bit, the first 20 years we were married, we moved. I think we figured it out 22 times in 20 years. We would. I mean, we were bouncing all over the place. And the last thing I did before I left Milwaukee, I was working for American Motors, and I ended up. I bought a bar, and I was running the bar, and boy, I was really doing good. And I kept working, and but I was drinking all the time. And I ran the bar, and I worked. So I mean, money was nothing. I had plenty of money, and we were partying all the time. And turns out that my wife and me were going to get a divorce. We split up, and I ended up moving up to Minnesota, and she stayed in Milwaukee. I'd left her everything. I gave her the bar, I gave her the house, I gave her everything. The only thing I brought with me is I had a CJ7 Renegade, and I loved that vehicle, so I brought it with me. And the only problem is I was late on payments, and then before you know it, I wasn't making any payments because I didn't have any steady employment, and I was running the river, the Mississippi River. I got the river right in front of my house here, but I was running the river for some time for running set lines, and I mean I made a little money doing it, but I wasn't getting rich. But I was drinking all the time, and that was my biggest problem. And so this bus, I ran off the top of Mount Suribachi and ended up in getting court-martial over that one. So as I can remember, we were making a trip around the lake. We were in my Jeep, and we were going from bar to bar. And there's the Mississippi River widens out up just up the river a little bit, and it's Lake Pepin. So we went completely around the lake going to bars, and we got on the Wisconsin side. And I was sitting in the back of the Jeep, and a friend of mine was driving my Jeep, and another fellow was sitting on the other side, and he leaned out, but he thought he was holding the roll bar on the Jeep, but he was holding that little bar that was held the canvas top on. And we had the sides all rolled up on the canvas sides, so the Jeep was pretty well open. It was during the summer. And he started to fall out, and I reached for him to try to grab him, and we both ended up falling out of the Jeep, doing about 55 miles an hour. And I ended up tore all the hide off my back. I got rolled over on my back and was sliding down this pavement. And well, to make a long story short, the friend that was driving the Jeep, he ended up in jail, and I had to go to court. And of course, I lied. I committed perjury, and he got off. I lived in this trailer here for some time on Iwo Jima. Anyway, he got off because I lied, and I didn't think anything of these things. And then it was A short time after that, my wife came up for a visit, and she was on crutches when she got off the bus. And she had sent all the kids up to live with me. And so here I was in a little 2-room shack with 6 kids. And I wasn't capable of the kids was taking care of themselves. I got and this is a sad thing. My children raised each other. The older kids took care of the younger kids, and I just went about doing my thing. So my wife comes up and she gets off the bus and she's on crutches, and she ends up. We ended up sitting in a place called Slippery's. If you ever seen that movie, Grumpy Old Men, they talk about Slippery's in that movie. It's right down the street from me here now because I live right on the river. And turns out we were talking and we decided to try to get back together again. We basically said we did it for the kids, so we actually moved into a house after that. But I ran into a problem. I was working for this place. It was called Camper City, and we were building toppers for pickups. And the guy that was running the company was embezzling the money. And one day I went to work, and the place was closed up, locked up tighter than heck. I didn't have a job. So I was on my way home, and I had lost the Jeep. Meanwhile, they had repossessed it, and I was driving this old beat-up car, an old Pontiac, and on the way home, I threw a rod in the car. So the car was sitting on the side of the road. It was winter, and it was one of those days like it is today. Right now, it's 8 below, but it was a lot colder. It was 22 below, I believe, that day. And I ended up walking home in that cold. And it was about a 3-mile walk. But that wasn't too bad. I got home, and I told my wife what had happened. And she said, well, how are we going to pay the bills? And I said, well, I'll have to look for work, I guess. And she said, well, how are you going to look for work? You don't even have a car. Well, it was kind of hard. Times are real tough. And then, of all things, I was behind on the rent, and we were being evicted. I ran out of fuel oil. We had no food in the house. And when we ran out of fuel oil, of course, I poured antifreeze in the toilet and everything to keep it from freezing up and breaking. And I put a mattress in one room, had an electric heater, and all the kids and my wife and myself, we slept in that one room on that mattress. And that's when my search started for God. I had been brought up Catholic. I was, communion, confirmation. I went through all that. My mother raised us Catholic, even though my dad had no religion at all. And we ended up being evicted. But I knew things were really down, and I got up one morning. You could see your breath in the house. I mean, it was so cold. I can't tell you how cold it was. And I got down on my knees, and my prayer was, Lord, if you're out there, you're the only one that can help. And I mean, it was a faithless prayer. I didn't even know if there was a God. I had lost all faith. But I got off my knees, and I walked into town. And I went to the bank, and I asked to see the president, John Dolphin, his name was. And I went in his office, and I said, John, I introduced myself. I says, I'm going to lay my cards on the table. And I told him what had happened. I lost my job, and car, is broke and not working, and I got no money got kids that are hungry, I didn't know what to do. Well, it turned out that he gave me a small loan. He says, I don't know why, but I just believe you'll pay it back. So he gave me a small loan. I had no collateral, nothing. I mean, he just trusted me. I went around the corner and I went to a realtor, and the guy's name was uh, Marco, Ev Marco, and Ev. I knew him from the bars because I was drinking, and I said, Ev, I says, here's the story, and I laid my cards on the table, and he says, well, okay. He says, I got a place that a guy in Chicago owns. Maybe he'll let you stay there, temporary. So he called him, and the guy says, okay. So I ended up moving up to this house. It was a big house. It had a fireplace and everything, and that's all I cared about. And I had enough money. I went out and got some groceries, and then I had one drinking buddy that helped me move some of the stuff, but the sheriff's department confiscated a lot of our stuff and put it in storage. So I had to pay to get that out of storage, and so the money was going pretty fast. But I think it was almost the next day, I got a knock on the door, and some guy that I knew says, hey, somebody's been trying to get a hold of you from Lake City. They want you to come up there, take a physical. They want to hire you. So I got a job right away. And I remember when I got out on the highway, I was hitchhiking to work. I didn't have any other way. And I stuck my thumb out. The first car that came by picked me up. And there was a bunch of guys, they were going to work, same place that I was going to start. Well, they were all drinkers too. So we used to do, when we drove home, we used to stop at the liquor store and get a six-pack, and we'd all have a beer on the way home, and that's the way life goes. But this prayer that I prayed was on my mind. I wanted to know the God who answered that prayer. And from that point on, I started my quest in trying to find out who God was and how he could answer that prayer. And to me, it was a miracle. It really was. Well, that's where I'm going to end my story. I know I went a little bit longer than I normally do, but that was basically the first 40 years of my life. Now, on our next episode, I'm going to tell you about my last 40 years of my life. Actually, a little over 40, because I'm in my 80s now. And so with that, I am going to jump off of this screen, go back on my regular podcast screen here. Until next time, I just want you to know that there is a God out there, and he hears prayers, and he answers prayers. And he answered my prayer. And I'm going to tell you how he answered it. Not only did he answer it with saving my family from hunger and cold and the life that we were leading, but he also saved me for all eternity. With that, I'm just going to close. Lord, I just want to thank you that I can share my story with those out there that maybe led a life like I did and was in a situation where they came to the end of themselves and they had no place to turn. I just want to encourage people that God is a God that will hear your prayers and answer them. And I pray, Lord, that if anybody is listening to this recording, Lord, that they realize that God is real and he will answer every prayer. I pray this in your name, Lord. Amen. Well, again, thanks for joining me, and until next time, we'll have a great day.